Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here today. I know a lot of you have traveled a long way. I just got here from Portland myself at 1 o'clock in the morning, so it's great to be with you this morning. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Bill Hansen. I'm President and CEO of Strada Education Network, and I know many of you, but many of you I don't, so we do appreciate everybody taking the time to come and join us today. A lot of you may even be asking, who is Strada? I just wanted to maybe just take a minute. We were USA Funds for the last 56 years and had just, I think, a very proud of our history of 56 years of serving students in our country, 22 million students to the tune of $250 billion, and providing access to higher education and also saving the taxpayers billions of dollars. So we're grateful for our history, but on December 31st, we made a very important change in our company, and we are no longer involved in the administration of the student loan world and all of the ancillary services that go with that, and have really launched off into a very new trajectory that we've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years, and we've really been focusing on what I call completion with a purpose. And I think it's very important for us to focus our attention and our youth and our working adults to make sure that everybody has the tools and the information and the resources they need to make the right decisions about which college to go to, which degree to go to, what type of financing to get, and when they get into school to be able to persist and complete, and then hopefully be also helped onto the right career pathway and the right opportunities for a successful life. So this has really been our mission and what is driving us in everything that we're doing. We've organized ourselves really around what I call our 3 pillars of our strategic philanthropy, our research and insights, and our innovative solutions. And I just wanted to recognize Carol D'Amico, who is our Executive Vice President, who oversees our strategic philanthropy and our research and insights, and just an incredible leader, and you'll see her here with our panel in a little bit, but also really want to recognize her for really leading our team, who she will also introduce in a little bit, of the great team that we have here at Strada that have been working so hard on this project. Really what we have also done with our strategic philanthropy in just a few short years is we've served over 2 million students, and over almost 750 institutions of higher education have been engaged. We've worked with over 1,000 employers in 40 communities across the country, and we've also done most of this through 265 grants and sponsorships in 400 communities to really help work on our mission-related activities. On our research and innovation side and insight side of the house, too, we really have appreciated our previous work with Gallup. We've worked on a community college project together. Also worked with an HBCU project about 1.5 years ago. Very helpful work, but we really are looking to this relationship to really help give us a very strong foundation to further our work and our research and insights going forward. Our innovative solutions have really changed in the last couple of years as we've been, again, winding down our legacy business and trying to ramp up our new, and we really are trying to help provide a suite of services to help students in their life cycle to get into college, through college, and onto a purposeful life. And when we transitioned away from our old company, we actually had to come up with a new name for the new company, and I think you'll see a common thread through these companies that we are now affiliated with. The word Strada means pathway, and this is what we're really trying to help students make the best decisions on their paths in life. And these organizations, you'll actually see a common thread of road trip, talking about pathways, but also I just was out in Portland, Oregon with Inside Track, which is the newest member of our family, yesterday, and again helping to coach students to get through college and onto their pathways. The other important work that we are with Student Connections, again in helping students make financial literate decisions in their life, to also help institutions make wise decisions as well. And Education at Work is really an exciting company for us as well, where we really are helping to provide employment and tuition assistance opportunities for students while they're in college, and again, getting them linked up with employers so that they can succeed when they get out of college. And then also at Dextera, we're really also working with institutions to help analyze their data to get the better outcomes at the institutional level. But this is really why we're here today, is to talk about how we can link all of our insights and research into really what we're trying to do with our solutions as well. But when I first started with USA Funds 4 years ago, I really was very concerned about three key areas that are of national concern to me and to our organization. One is the 36 million working adults who have some higher education but no degree. And I think when you compound this with the rugged economy that we've had for the last 10 years, we really have a generation or two that have not only been left behind, but have a lot of catch-up work to do going forward, as our economy hopefully will be improving in the coming years. The second issue that we're really trying to address are the 6 million unfilled jobs in our economy. And I really view this as a national tragedy that we have this rugged economy, and because of a misalignment of our higher education system and what our employers are expecting to have, the skills that graduates need to have to come out. We just have all of our labor employment reports out, and we're usually happy with 200,000 new jobs a month. When I just think big about really where, if we could really link up not just the current needs in the marketplace, but also the future needs of where the jobs are going to be, this seems like this is something that we ought to be able to try and fix to really help be a catalyst for economic growth, but also for individual success in so many millions of lives. And the last area that we're working to address are the 5 million disaffected or disconnected youth in our country, ages 16 to 24. And again, most of these individuals have had nobody in their family ever go to college, or anybody in their family even have a job. And so really trying to help address this challenge is something that we're spending a lot of time and resources on. So, how do we measure student success is really helpful to us in addressing these areas. And there's some great things out there that do ratings and rankings and have quality, but all of these are frankly based on inputs of what is going into a system. And it is just really been so important that we have the voice of the consumer to be able to understand really what the true needs are and to really help fix the challenges that our American economy and American higher education is facing. And so this is really what we're so excited about, and this has been done in other sectors. And as the slide shows, with the healthcare and the hospitality and manufacturing and retail sectors, the voice of the consumer drives quality, drives success in these industries, and we haven't had that in higher education. And so we are really just incredibly thrilled with our partnership with Gallup to be able to have this 3-year project that is going to be interviewing 350 individuals and has been interviewing 350 individuals every night, which means 10,000 a month, over 120,000 a year. And these are 18 to 64-year-olds, so these are individuals who have never gone on to college, maybe didn't even graduate from high school, to people with advanced degrees and people everywhere in between. And with the expansive database that we're going to be able to break this down by state, by communities, by regions, by age, by sex, by race, career, occupational past, you name it. And the other thing that I think Brandon will be talking about in a few minutes is the fact that 70% of the respondents have also said that they would be willing to be recontacted on follow-up surveys. So this is going to be a very rich and robust database for us. And the types of questions that we're asking are, what factors shaped your education path? How relevant is your education to your career and your life today? And was your education worth the cost? And do you need more education to get ahead? And would you recommend your path to others? And so this is really leading us to our inaugural report today on really asking the fundamental question that if you had it to do all over again, would you change your degree, your major, or the selection of your institution? And I just am, the findings that we're gleaning from this, I think, are very important for us as a foundation for the reports that are going to be coming out on an ongoing, regular basis. I just also wanted to thank a number of folks who have helped us get to this point. Ed Schmidt, who is the chairman of our Board of Trustees, is with us today, and our board has been very engaged from day one on this and has been incredibly supportive, incredibly insightful, and detailed in helping us get this right. Also, we've put together a year ago an advisory committee, and we have many of these members in the room today, and you'll hear from a few of them with our Insights panel in a few minutes. But we're just very grateful, and this is an incredibly diverse group of individuals, from former governors to academic leaders to people that represent important populations, research, and so we're just grateful for all of those who have given so much of their time and their talent and their insights to us to help us get to where we are today. As I said, today's report is really a baseline for what we're going to be doing going forward, and I think some of this has already been spilling out into the news media, but there is good news in this, that a majority who actually have received a credential agree or strongly agree that they received a high-quality education, and I think that's an important insight from the survey. But there's also, and what Brandon and others will be talking more about, is again some revelations that we do have a tremendous opportunity to improve and help students and improve institutions to make sure that their education pathways and decisions are optimal for them in their lives and what they're doing. And it really is our intent with this first report to again build the foundation for a regular series of reports that Carol and others will talk a little bit about later on. But we really also want this to be a conversation, and so and not just today, but in an ongoing process. And so we put into place a lot of different avenues to communicate with one another. But it's also, many of you that are in this room are those that we need to communicate with and to have this national dialogue going forward, as we're looking to you as higher education leaders, post-secondary education leaders, thought leaders, researchers, entrepreneurs, employers, parents, and again, most importantly, the voice of the consumer that we're reaching out to. But you know, I think we really all, and knowing most and many of you, have a very common mission and what we're all working on, and that is to really help Americans have fulfilling lives and to really help our economy be vital and to help it grow and to be strong so that our country is stronger, but that also that individual lives are stronger. And that's really what we're driven to accomplish and to work on each and every day. Again, we welcome your engagement, and there are going to be a number of ways for us to download the reports and get the updates, but also the email questions and feedback can be sent to the information that's on the screen and in your information. But we really, again, are grateful for you taking the time and to really help spread the important results that we're seeing here, and again, to get us your insights and your good counsel and wisdom as we move forward in this effort in the coming years ahead. Let me transition here, and I'm introducing Brandon Bustede from Gallup, and just again, very grateful for Brandon and his team. Really could not have better partners to work with on this. And but before Brandon comes up, we're actually going to show a short video. But again, thank you for coming today, and look forward to talking to you throughout the morning. Thank you.
Every year, over 20 million Americans invest billions of dollars in post-secondary education. They come from all different backgrounds. Half are new high school graduates, but the other half are less traditional. They're older Americans looking to acquire new skills, military veterans returning to civilian life, and single parents seeking to better support their families. With over 6,000 post-secondary education programs, choosing one is a complex investment decision without a guaranteed payoff. Americans have a wealth of information and consumer reviews when it comes to buying or selling a home, shopping for a car, choosing a new TV, and even deciding where to go to dinner. In post-secondary education, however, there is no consumer voice, even though it's one of the largest and most permanent investments an individual will ever make. Ultimately, we should be empowering consumers. So this year's Strada Education Network teamed up with Gallup to launch the Education Consumer Pulse, a daily survey of real people giving their honest feedback on actual experiences, such as where they went, what they studied, the degree they chose, and what influenced their decisions, even if that decision was not to attend college at all. With 350 interviews a day and more than 122,000 a year, the Education Consumer Pulse is set to become the most extensive and useful database on education experiences ever. Based on interviews, we know that more than half of Americans would change where they went, what they studied, or their level of education if they could do it over. It is the most striking for Americans that start a post-secondary education program but don't finish. We believe that when organizations listen to consumers, good things happen. This is why the Education Consumer Pulse is a groundbreaking new tool. It empowers the consumer by giving them a voice and reinforces the importance of students finding a path that matches their skills and interests and sets them up to achieve their lifestyle goals. It keeps with our mission of completion with a purpose, which aims to help students complete their chosen path and ensure a smooth transition from education to employment.
Good morning. All right, audience participation. There's going to be more of that in a second. My name is Brandon Bustede. I'm Executive Director for Education and Workforce Development at Gallup, and this is a real thrill and honor. I have a chance to present a lot of data. It's kind of part of my job. But this project in particular has been special, and I think Bill has already described some of the reasons why. But as I dive into describing the data, this is what I want everybody to appreciate, that this is data based on live interviews of 89,492 U.S. adults. We have interviewers at Gallup who literally every day call and interview people and ask them questions about their education decisions. One of the most powerful things that was shared with me was from our interviewing teams who do lots of interviews because, of course, they work for Gallup and this is what they do for their job. And they would share stories with me about the interviews they were conducting for this project. And what was interesting is that in the middle of the interview, people would pause and say, wow, I've never thought about that. That's a really interesting question. That's the first time anybody's asked me that, right? To have them reflect on their education decisions. And so this is, as we've already emphasized, not just a massive data set, but importantly, it's a data set that comes from the voices of U.S. adults. So as Bill mentioned, we're interviewing a random sample of 18 to 65-year-olds in the U.S. 70% of the people we connect with are done through a cell phone connection. The other 30% are landline. And as we think about where the project is going, right, as of today, so the report consists of the 89,492 responses. We've already interviewed over 110,000 as of today. So the fact that this data set is growing every day is really going to become an amazing feature to it, as Bill mentioned. So what I want to do, though, before I dive into the results, is actually try and gather another 150 or so responses to three of the questions that we're going to talk to today. So I'm going to ask all of you to reflect on this. The three questions that this report keyed off of in particular are, if you had to go back and do it over again, would you change any of the following? Pursue the same level of education, e.g. bachelor degree, associate degree, postgraduate degree. Would you pursue the same area of study or major? And would you attend the same institution? So we're going to do a live polling feature. Everybody, I hope, will participate. Would love to see the results of this room and see how closely it gels with the data we have from U.S. adults across the country. So you can text EC Pulse to 22333. And the first question is, if you had to do it all over again, would you still pursue the same level of education? So please go ahead and submit your responses. We'll give it a couple minutes and see how it fleshes out here.
All caps?
I don't know. Is it Riley? Is it all caps or does it matter? Doesn't matter. Just EC Pulse. All right, so roughly 90-10. It's vacillating a little bit, 88-12. So only about 10% of this audience would change their level of education. We'll go to the next question. If you had to do it all over again, would you still pursue the same major or area of study? It's kind of fun stuff. This is only the second time in my life I've used this live polling feature, and I have to tell you, it's anxiety-provoking because the last thing you would ever want to be a guy from Gallup is to do a live poll and have the software not work, right? So I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed a little longer and knock on wood. So interesting differences. Not a lot would redo their level of education, but over half in this room here would change their area of study or major. And then I'm going to ask you the final question. If you had to do it all over again, would you still attend the same institution? Well, about a third would go to a different institution. So interestingly enough, as you'll see, your responses are pretty reflective of what we saw from the national population. So let me dive into our findings. And the first one is that slightly over half of all Americans, if they had to go back and do it over again, would have changed at least one of those three decisions. So collectively, half of us would redo some aspect of our education. If you break that down, and you can see this is fairly similar to this audience, not a lot of folks would redo their level of education, 12%, but increasingly 28% would change the institution they attended, almost a third, and 36%, this is the highest of redo or regret, would change their major or area of study. So as we dive a little bit deeper into this, when you break it down by different degree levels, there are differences in the likelihood that people would go back and redo different aspects. Interestingly enough, bachelor's degree holders are the highest, up with those with some college, no degree, in saying that they would redo their major. So higher than associate degree holders at 36%, higher than postgraduate holders, which you can see is the lowest at 24%, and also higher than folks who have vocational tech or trade degrees or certificates. So interesting to see that bachelor degree are the highest on levels of regret for a major or area of study. We're going to unpack that a little bit. It's probably not surprising to you that there are differences in people's likelihood of regretting one of their decisions by their current income. So although it is true that folks who earn $40,000 or less are more likely to regret some aspect of their education, the one thing that we found fairly stunning was that 43% of U.S. adults who make $250,000 or more a year would still go back and redo some aspect of their education. So although there is a relationship with income and regret related to decisions, obviously you can see that big earners still have some level of regret in their decision. This was one of the more interesting findings to me, and I think one that certainly begs for further consideration in practice and policy and a number of things, and that is this finding, that graduates who obtained their degree at age 30 or over are much less likely to regret their decisions than graduates who finished their degree under the age of 30. So there's a lot to think about in this, and I want to weave some of the points together, because if you start to look at the areas that we've kind of uncovered that are higher or lower in their likelihood of wanting to redo the decision, there are some themes, right? And so you saw earlier those with technical and trade degrees and postgraduate degrees were the lowest on regret. You're seeing here that those who graduated at a later age are lowest in their regret. And so those are things that we think and want to do more explanation are linked to more direct pathways, right? What do those things have in common? People who've had some experience and decided very clearly what they want to do, so they go back and they pursue a particular program. Postgraduate degree, much more specialized, much like trade vocational, much more specialized, a direct path to a job. So there's some interesting things that are starting to get us to think about the implications of this work and also further research. One of the surprises that I think is a counterintuitive finding is this one, that the likelihood of regretting any of your decisions has nothing to do with parents' education level. And most other things in education, it does, right? We know that if mom or dad went to college, right, you're more likely to go, you're more likely to complete. On the likelihood that you regret any of your decisions, there's no relationship, with the exception of if both of your parents had postgraduate degrees. That's it. So something here, again, where we want to certainly explore more. And then if we look at majors, STEM majors, and you can see in the report how we classified these 4 categories between STEM, business, liberal arts, and public service, but STEM majors are the least likely to regret their choice of field of study. And then, and Bill mentioned this point as kind of a final slide that I have to share with you today, that despite the fact that there is a relatively high percentage of people that would redo some aspect of their educational pathway, most Americans rated their education as high quality. So if you combine the 5, strongly agree with agree, somewhere between 80 and 90% roughly say they had a high quality education. So, these are interesting things to dive into, but let me just point out something. Although I certainly believe this is a very powerful and positive finding about higher education and higher education quality, one of the interesting things that you'll also note, look at the 5 strongly agree. 58% of those with bachelor's degrees strongly agree they had a high quality education. It's 56% of those with technical trade or vocational. Virtually no difference. And only about 53%, but fairly similar, again, 58, 53, 56, if you look at associate degree, some postgraduate work, and those that are significantly higher are those who finished a postgraduate degree. So these are interesting things to think about. I think what I'm most excited about is that this day, thank you. I know the phones are ringing off the hook. They want to know more about this. And we will be taking questions afterward. So I think what's most important about this data is that even in this brief period of time that we've started to share some of the findings, we did a preview yesterday with ACE and some of the higher education organization leaders from across town. It's already starting to change the conversation. We have a lot of data about higher education, and when you start to layer in the voice of the consumer, interesting things happen. In some cases, you confirm things you believe. In other cases, there's incredibly counterintuitive findings that you want to know more about. And in others, myths are pierced. And so as we go deeper into this, I hope that more than anything, and Bill, you said it best, it's the start of a conversation and changing the conversation and how we think about this. So it has been an honor to be part of this project. If I could just ask a couple folks to stand. We've got a number of folks from the Strada team who have been involved in this project, and a number of the Gallup folks who have put thousands of hours into this work. Could you all please just stand so we can give you an applause? Gallup and Strada teams, please stand. I know some of you are already standing in the back, so thank you guys. Thank you. And with that, we are going to move to our panel.
Thought you were giving me last-minute instructions. Don't embarrass the family. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to those who are watching us live on our Facebook page as well. We want to engage you in this conversation. And you've heard that term a lot this morning from our CEO, from Brandon, that this is a start of a conversation. And we're going to start today with 3 members of our advisory committee. If you want to come up, Johnny, Teresa, Les, to help us start this national dialogue about what these insights mean, what they will mean for folks in higher education, thought leaders, researchers, practitioners, students, parents, employers. While these are members of our advisory team. I can assure you this is not rehearsed, and I have no idea, really, what our folks are going to say, but they're going to start us out by putting some context around these findings today, again, starting the discussion that we're going to be engaged in over the next few years. You know who they are. They're on the agenda in front of you, so I'm not going to waste our precious time repeating their great credentials, but I do want to provide some context for why they were chosen and what they're going to help us, I guess, put in context. First is Dr. Lenkowski. Les, you're representing today many hats, as all of you are. Les as a faculty member, as an expert in nonprofit philanthropic organizations, as a former head of a public policy research organization. You'll be helping us figure out what this could mean for all those roles. Commissioner Lubbers, you represent many hats as well, a former state legislator in our great state of Indiana, where we are headquartered, a policymaker, now Commissioner of Higher Education, representing also public higher education. And Mr. Taylor, you also have a lot to say about higher education, but also represent underrepresented students who don't always fare so well in our current system. And so what could these insights mean for those folks and and to enhance their success? So Les, we're going to start with you. So these are consumer insights. We assert that this is maybe the first time that we've really inserted the consumer voice in higher education. Is that true? Is this a fad? What impact is it likely to have both in the broader nonprofit world, philanthropic world, and higher education world? Yes, I am.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I'm here today in a very unaccustomed role as a researcher. At least you didn't call me a professor. I was getting worried there. But who has spent his entire career studying public serving organizations, both in government and in the nonprofit sector. And this report is indeed an example of a growing trend in the study of public serving organizations, trying to assess what is called constituent voice, what those who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of education, health, social, and other services really think of them. Those techniques have long, as Bill suggested earlier, been utilized in the business world through market research, consumer satisfaction surveys, and others. And government has also incorporated constituent voice in its programs. The FDA, for example, polls patients when it's considering new drugs for approval. Many regulatory agencies have public comment periods. But it's not really been as common among organizations that provide education, health, social, or other kinds of human services. There are lots of reasons we think for that. Beneficiaries don't usually pay the full cost of the services they receive, may not be much of a position to judge their quality. Nonetheless, all of these kinds of organizations have invested considerable effort in accrediting and ratings and other types of activities to try to determine what characteristics should good programs have, and more recently, outcome measurement, what have they accomplished? And that's hospitals and others, not just higher education. The Strada Education Network Gallup project adds another dimension. What do Americans think of the educations they received? What was valuable? What was not? What would they do differently? Those kinds of questions have been widely asked in healthcare and are the subject of a great deal of debate within the healthcare sector, and they're not entirely unfamiliar in higher education. Every year, those of us who teach are subjected to evaluations by our students, and they almost always show that those who give the best grades are the best teachers. Can you imagine that? And then there are online services such as Rate My Professor, who ask students to assess their professors on a variety of factors, including their hotness. I have never done well on that one. And then there are surveys of particular groups, freshmen, women, minorities, and others. This study, though, is far more comprehensive, both in the questions it's asking and the number of voices being heard. And you've heard that described, so I'm not going to go over that. I will only say I know of nothing close to it in higher education. The data collected will be an invaluable resource, not only in the reports that Strada and Gallup will produce, but in secondary analysis as the data becomes public and would be subjected to interest from other research. I know my colleagues at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy are already eager to find out whether or not satisfaction with higher education experience is a good predictor of donations. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on a couple of points from the report and offer a few interpretations meant to be, which I think are important and I hope provocative. You've heard the big one, which is 80% of Americans give high marks to the quality of their experience in higher education, yet more than 50% would make significant changes. How can this be? Well, the report offers some suggestive ideas. First of all, we've already seen that students are more likely to want to make major changes if they did not complete their degrees. So that leads to the obvious question, how can colleges and universities improve the likelihood that students will finish what they began and do so in a way that will lead to personal and career satisfaction? We spend a lot of time talking about access to higher education. That's undoubtedly important, but so too, and maybe even more important, is completion. Second, students are less likely to want to make major changes if they started at a later age. We just heard about that one. Is this more support for that old adage that higher education is wasted on the young? Perhaps we need to revisit the assumption that most students should go full-time to college after finishing high school and look more carefully at other options, including a program that I helped create, AmeriCorps, that might enable students to combine work and experience with classroom or online learning throughout one's lifetime. Third point, students who obtain bachelor's degrees in STEM fields are less likely to be dissatisfied than those who study in the liberal arts or even business. Is this further evidence of the crisis in the liberal arts that we hear so much about, or the overexpansion of what is taught in business programs? Or perhaps, since the respondents range in age from 18 to 64, does this tell us something about how American society and the economy have been changing since those surveyed first entered colleges and universities? Once a solid grounding in history and literature were sufficient to have a successful career in our country. But this survey may be telling us they no longer are. What then, though, should those of us who believe the liberal arts are essential for a fulfilling life, not to mention a civilized society, do? The baseline report also puts to rest some widely held assumptions. One that interests me, students who complete their degrees with a lot of debt are not much more likely to want to change what they did than students with less debt. This suggests to me, at any rate, that students understand that higher education is costly and often requires borrowing, but what really matters is how much value they get, not how much they wind up paying. Another important finding concerns the influence of parental education on satisfaction of their children with higher ed. There have been a wide range of commentators lately pointing out the enormous advantages youngsters raised by well-educated professional parents have over those raised in less well-educated or working-class homes. That may be true in a variety of ways, but students from less advantaged backgrounds seem to be able to make good choices about what school to attend or what to study as their more advantaged counterparts do. What accounts for that surprising finding? Let me just conclude by saying, not least important, the baseline survey reinforces the value of adding a constituent voice perspective to other ways of assessing higher education. It turns out that respondents with higher incomes are significantly less inclined to wish they had made different decisions at college or university than those with lower incomes. There is obviously a big issue of interpretation here. Are better off people more satisfied with their higher education experiences because it made them better off? Or are they better off because they had better experiences in colleges and universities? We don't know that based on the available data, and I hope as the reports roll out, as the data becomes more available, we'll look at questions like this. But what we can say now is that the perceptions of this group of people who have had at least some higher education are not just expressions of their feelings, but are correlated with one of the outcomes all of us would consider as important in higher education. That is why I'm so excited by this project, grateful to its sponsors, and eager to see the subsequent reports that will be produced by it.
Thank you, Les. And I want to make sure you all know that we are going to engage you in this conversation after our panel, so be thinking of questions that you have for Brandon, the panelists, and also the folks on Facebook following us today will also be able to ask those questions as well. So thanks for getting us started off. Teresa, higher education and policymakers, do they have a role? How will they view this report? And is there a responsibility on their part?
Yes, there is a responsibility on their part, and I think Les has actually framed this discussion in a very important way, and I'm going to share a little bit from the perspective of a policymaker and as the Commissioner for Higher Ed, not specifically about Indiana, because I think what we're talking about today has value across the nation, but I may reflect a little bit on the Indiana story as well. We have a strategic plan in Indiana called Reaching Higher, Delivering Value. And when we put this plan together, it's our most recent strategic plan, it became abundantly clear to us that value was really at the center of all of our discussions, sometimes reflected in discussions about ROI, the qualitative metrics that you would be able to talk about that enhance the value of your higher education experience. And it's sort of interesting, isn't it, that at a time when we have so many people questioning all the way from articles about is college worth it to what is the value of college, how much debt do we have, and at the same time we know that employers need people who have higher levels of education and training than ever before, that it drives this discussion about is college worth it. You know, the answer to that is, you know, higher education, however you describe that, and education beyond high school, credentials, certificates, degrees, that higher education is more important than ever, but that, in fact, we need to find ways to increase the value of higher education. And I think that's at the center of the report that we're talking about today as we get the pulse of what people around the nation think about their higher education experience. This certainly complements, I think, work that you're seeing at the states as well. We put out an Indiana College Value Index in Indiana, and we asked three sort of related questions, which were, will I graduate, will I learn what I need to know, and will I find fulfilling employment? And so I think this is so important that we look at this kind of information and we figure out, to answer Carol's question in a more specific way, what should policymakers do with this information, and is higher education paying any attention to this information? I think we need to look at this kind of information to figure out, you know, what policies we enact, what do we fund, How do we use the data to actually inform students so that they are less likely when they finish to say, I made a mistake in the decision that I made? And I think that requires everything from a stronger alignment between K-12 earlier in a student's experience. They need to be exposed to the world of work. We used to think you go to school and you get a job. And now what we're finding again is that we're blurring those lines so that we actually, this is done not in a sequential way, but that it's actually done aligned throughout that time. I'm not offering that we should be tracking students in the 7th grade into a specific job. I am saying that we need to expose them to the world of work so that they have an idea about what they want to do. And as they get older, that wide funnel of career exploration becomes more narrow and they make wiser decisions. So in Indiana, for example, in middle school, we think it's important that every student have exposure to a career explorer, some sort of an instrument that allows them to think about their dispositions and what they want to do. And then as they move into whatever aspect of higher education that might be, we need, obviously, to have much more intrusive career involvement throughout that time, not the last 6 weeks before you graduate from whatever your program is. But we know Gallup has done work in this regard as well, that it needs to be comprehensive throughout their experience. As I mentioned, we need more alignment in college between what they are learning and what they are going to do. And I think this information shows this very clearly. And I think part of that is that we need to make sure that we have a stronger engagement with the employer community. And I'm hoping that as we continue with this, and we go down the next stage, that we actually engage with the employers so that, in fact, we have a better alignment and people are having some experience with work-based experiences. We think that every student, certainly in high school, but certainly in college, should be exposed to the world of work. This is especially true in liberal arts. We've done this well in areas like nursing, engineering, teaching. We need to make sure that every student has an opportunity to do that. Some of what they will learn is what they don't want to do, and some of it will be to confirm what they want to do. And we need to do this so that it's aligned with the curriculum and it doesn't require a greater time for someone to complete. We have a school, a small liberal arts school in Indiana that redesigned a 3-year bachelor's degree in a small community in Indiana, requiring that every student have work-based experience before they graduate. So I think that's very important as well. I think in this report we learned what makes inclined to make people happier about their experiences. We learned that the older students tend to be more satisfied. This speaks to what we're doing across the nation. Bill mentioned the number of students who have some college and no degree. In Indiana, a state of about 6.5 million people, we have 750,000 Hoosiers who have some college but no degree. They started, never finished. We have a program now called You Can Go Back, where we had 9,000 re-enroll in 1 year. We're complementing that by those students who have no quality credential at all. And I think we can use this data to actually help us figure that out. And we're going to say to them, if you come back and you get a credential that's aligned to a need in the economy, we'll make sure that it doesn't cost you to do that, as long as it's aligned with something that we need to have you do. I think this information will actually be really important to actually talk about the benefits of education in a wide range, vocational, associate, bachelor's, beyond, and then how do we use this information to change our policies and to make sure that more adults are happy with their decisions. Certainly the information we learned about STEM degree holders. We know that, but I think part of that is not just that it's science, technology, engineering, and math, it's that it's aligned to something that they are going to do. We can do that same thing with other degrees. I mean, certainly in the liberal arts, it's not that the liberal arts don't have value. And probably like many of you, I'm a liberal arts undergraduate major, and it's had great value to me, but we need to align it with what people want to do. We know, not surprisingly, those who have a high degree of debt may be more likely to question some of their decisions, and those who have had lower incomes. I think all of this information is going to be really important as states, and I speak on behalf of states, as states actually align their policies and their programs and their outreach to people in their states to ways that will make them more likely to feel like the decisions they made them successful. I couldn't agree more with the comments about why the brand of completion with a purpose is so important. And I think as the states are looking at embracing policies, we are increasingly doing that around the areas of making sure that what we learn and what we do are aligned. So I couldn't be happier with the fact that we've started this very important discussion. I think it complements discussions that are taking place in our states. I think it will drive some interesting new discussions about awareness of things that we have not considered fully in the past. And I'm excited about being engaged in that work as we go forward.
Thank you, Teresa. Johnny, you and I have talked a lot about these issues broadly and what it might mean for how we define college readiness in the U.S., what it means for that transition from high school into post-secondary into a job. So I know you have a few thoughts to share.
Just a few. So first of all, thank you. Thank you, Strada. Thank you, Gallup, for doing this work. It is a long time coming. But I have to be transparent. When I first heard about this and was invited to join the advisory committee, my first thought was, why would I do that? I mean, the result is, duh. If you ask most 40-year-olds, would you do something different than when you were 18-year-old? When you were an 18-year-old, you're going to get, yeah. Most of us would say, yeah. If I reflect back on my life 22 years ago, I sure as heck would do things a little differently. So to me, there was no big surprise here. And then the research started to come in. And I began to see the granularity. It wasn't just high level, would I go to school or not, or go to a different school, or choose a different major, pick a different wife, drive another car, who knows? And the answer to that middle one is, of course, as a divorcee. But more than you want to know, right? Got to give it levity in here, guys. But the reality is, once the research came, I really began to appreciate why this was so important, and particularly for the communities that we represent. My day job, I represent historically black colleges and universities. And just to be clear, they're historically black, but we have several institutions, including 2 in West Virginia and 1 in Missouri, Bluefield State College, West Virginia State University, and Lincoln University of Missouri, that are majority white. So they're historically black, but not currently black. So my comments are about members of fragile communities. That's a term that we use. I don't like to call people poor and unfortunate and all those sorts of words. They come from fragile communities. And when it comes to this kind of research, this is probably, and I would argue, more important to these communities than any community. Because education is the great equalizer. It's the only way for many of these people to break the vicious cycle of poverty. And so if there are things that we now know, fast forward 20, 30, 40 years later, learnings from people who attended the higher education system, people from these fragile communities that we can take back to the people who were coal miners in West Virginia, Hispanics in our schools in California and Texas, if there are learnings to help inform their decision-making process when they're talking with their parents, most of whom are first generation, if we can get data and insight and help them make better decisions, maybe then we can move this. Because I'm really, really nervous about what will happen, and I hope you're going to do this work, if you're going to unbundle these numbers and start breaking it out by race and gender and socioeconomic status. And that's where I think we're going to see some real interesting disparities. And again, not to cast blame on the people, who participate in these and may have not made good decisions, but so that it informs good policy and we make better decisions. We reach back into the PK through 12 space, and as you point out, help these kids who come from families who don't have the same sorts of resources and don't have the same access to information so that they can be better consumers. I'm reminded of a story, and I'll wrap up with this. I was talking to a young man about whether or not we were in Baltimore, in fact, and I asked a little boy on a project, we were visiting a neighborhood project, and said, "Are you going to go to college?" And he said, "No." And it kind of shocked me, and I said, "Why wouldn't you?" And he said, "Because look at him. He went to college, and look how it worked out for him." That's what 7, 8, 10-year-olds, you don't have to have like an MIT PhD to figure this out. These kids are looking at where the level of happiness, satisfaction, engagement, overall well-being, as Gallup measures quite a bit, and they're saying, did that work out? And so to the extent we can give them positive role models by using this data to inform how we educate people from these fragile communities, I think this data can be game-changing. And it was really interesting. The kid said to me, you know, as I began to process what he was saying, he says, like, look at this. Johnny goes off to college, spends 4 or 5 years obtaining his degree, incurs $60,000, $70,000 in debt potentially, and comes back and has to live with his mom. Can't afford a car, is taking a bus. Well, guess what? The other little Johnnies in that neighborhood are watching him. He serves as the model for why they should not go to school. So we have a vested interest in unpacking this data, and I hope you do this in subsequent research, Bill and Carol, and help us, and listen, not be afraid of the results, because they're going to be what they are, but I think if we have good data, good evidence, then it can really inform some positive changes from a policy standpoint going forward.
Well, thank you. And just to answer your question, Johnny, we do plan to do all of the above, have a continuing cadence of these reports over the next few years, because there are many questions in the survey. We only answered essentially one 3-part question today. Sorry, Stephanie, it's one 3-part question, not 3 questions. And so there's lots more to come. And we've already teed up one, I think it was last week, it was mentioned at a House committee testimony, and that is, where do people get their information? And that too was very enlightening to some people. Where do you get your guidance? And what do you find most valuable? So look for that to coming soon. But we also plan, of course, to keep the reports current on our website and have people comment on them, have them suggest additional questions, and suggest further research. We also have the ability, I think Bill or Brandon mentioned it, surprising to me anyway, 75% of the people we talk to every night agree to be recontacted by Gallup by email. So we could ask them a lot more in-depth questions. So we have a lot of potential with what we're gathering every day, 350 people. But now is the time for you all to be engaged. This is a conversation, which means 2 ways. And so we have some folks that have microphones so that you can be heard, and if you would, state your name and affiliation if you would like, and direct your questions to Bill or Brandon or the panelists. There's one here.
Should I go first here? Good morning. Diane Bosak from Achieving the Dream. I guess my question is probably more for Brandon. Can you break the data down by geographic area? Is there any difference between the southern part of the country and the eastern part, let's say, in terms of responses? And do you have any other detailed information, male, female responses, something that would give us some more idea of where dissatisfaction might be, or?
Yeah, so the answer is that the data set allows us to do all those things. The next question becomes, have we done that analysis, and when will we report on that? And so you will see that over time. So we are a matter of a couple months away from having enough data to break this by all 50 states and a little over 100 metropolitan statistical areas. So this will not just be state-level data that we can report, but it will also be regional data. And as we have all come to understand more and more about both our economy and our education system, most of the really interesting insights are going to happen not just at a state level, but at a regional level. So those are things that are going to be forthcoming. We've started to peek at some of that data in the analysis, so we have an idea. There will be differences. I mean, you will see important differences that will be guideposts for local community college leaders, university leaders, employers, right, policymakers. So this is stuff that will become increasingly more valuable for people like Teresa and her colleagues at the state level, but also city level. So I'll just leave it at that for now. You will see a lot of this forthcoming, but please know, those of you who work with associations, higher education think tanks, this is a data set that will be made available in certain ways for further research and certainly to ask the question. So you have an interesting question, you can certainly send that to the Strada education team, and we will run analysis for people who have interesting questions if it's data that is knowable from what we've collected. So thank you.
My name is Mark Walsh. I'm a technology venture capitalist here in D.C. Just a quick side note, I was the chairman of the board of trustees of my college, a, quote, selective Northeastern liberal arts college, and I met with 45 of me with a group called the Council of Board Chairs. We would compare notes to the top-rated U.S. News and Report colleges in the U.S., and all of us bemoaned our career center. So Teresa, I was struck by your comments on this, and I'm just interested if all of us felt the exact same way that the last 6 weeks, or with your analogy, the final chapter of that fourth year or fifth year, seemed to be so out of sync with what the expectation and the delivery of value. How can we maybe push some effort onto that? And are there some more ways in the data to drill down on the satisfaction of that specific element of the experience of higher ed?
Teresa, Brandon, maybe before Teresa answers, Gallup did a study on career services, and I don't know if you want to say a sentence or two, and then I think Teresa would respond.
Yeah, very briefly, we issued a report in December, so still a very fresh report. Only about half of college graduates, these are bachelor degree holders, ever availed themselves of their career service office in any form. So half take advantage of it. And of those who visited or used the service in any form, 16% said it was very helpful, which was the same percent as who said it was not at all helpful. So, I mean, I think it's a point that you've raised, that Teresa brought up. There is a lot of room for improvement. This is the glass half full perspective. There is a lot of room for improvement in career services, and there are innovative models out there. The problem, of course, is there's just not enough that have moved fast enough in that direction. I don't think institutions of higher education can move fast enough on that particular subject.
So, Teresa, you brought it up that you're trying to do something in Indiana, but talk a little bit more about some of those initiatives. I know there's been a big push about reinventing career services in the States.
Well, the Gallup data that Brandon talks about, I think, is very important and needs to be shared broadly with higher education. That number that only 16 or 17% found their career services to be of value to them, I think should be quite disturbing. I also think that the idea that career services sits over here in this separate place as opposed to being integrated throughout the disciplines, throughout the majors, throughout what kind of work-based experiences people have. So I think we need an entirely different model, and I think that's part of what the study showed. We need an entirely different model for career services. Why aren't people using them, and how would students use it differently, and how do our older adults use career services, and how do we redesign that for them? And so like every other enterprise in the 21st century, I suppose, career services needs to be redesigned around what kind of needs. Career services needs to talk more to employers. So that you don't all of a sudden have employers over here coming back and saying, you're sending us people who don't have the kinds of skills we need. Now, this is not to say that we're producing workers for employment only. We're producing people who think and are ready for 21st century jobs, and career services needs to help us do that. So I guess I would start with sharing the very good data we have that shows the inadequacies right now, not by evil intent, just because the world is changing, we need to upgrade our career services, and we need to align them with other aspects of the colleges and universities.
I don't know, Les or Johnny, if you wanted to weigh in on this.
Just add as well, was something Teresa also mentioned, while improving career services would be valuable at the graduate level, not just the undergraduate level, also finding ways for students to get engaged in the world of work while they are students is going to be important. I lost count of how many AmeriCorps members I spoke to when I was CEO of the Corporation for National and Community Service, who told me that if it hadn't been for AmeriCorps, they wouldn't have discovered their ability to teach a kid to read, to work with a medically ill veteran or something like that, and that had just redirected their entire career. And AmeriCorps is just one of many ways of doing it, and I think we need to think more about that.
Johnny?
Also add, it's interesting to me to see the difference of opinion about what consumers think about this and what sort of the faculty and administrators think about it. So I was at a meeting just recently, and a provost challenged the very notion that we should not be in the business of producing workers. And I then challenged this particular provost, and I said, but here's the deal. If you looked at the most recent UCLA freshman study, the one that they produce every year, the number one reason these kids go to school is not for a job, but a good job. And so your consumer is saying, that's why I'm coming. I know what you have in mind, but that sure as hell isn't why I came here. I came here for something else. And so there's this big gap. And unfortunately right now, we are not listening to the consumer. I know you can't totally listen to the consumer. To your point, a hard professor gives you a bad grade, so you give them a bad grade. I'm not saying that's the way you should decide who should be your professors, but there are parts of this experience that we've got to focus on. And the reality now is when a kid comes out with the types of debt, if you think back to our age, and I hope most of you are in your 30s like me. If you were, I'm joking, but if you think back to that time, we didn't have to focus on that as much because we weren't coming out of school with $100,000 of student debt, undergrad. That wasn't our reality, so we could make different decisions. These kids are really making they're facing a different world. And if we recognize that, then we would naturally, to your point, get rid of the central career services office and put the business people in the business school, the STEM folks in the STEM school, journalism folks. People should be going to the various schools. By the way, the secret that'll happen is you'll get employers who hire all of those people to come to your campuses multiple times. If you're Gannett, you hire finance people, so you'll be coming to the business school. You hire journalists, you'll go to the journalist school, you'll go elsewhere. So I think there's some win-win in it for the schools as well, but they've got to begin listening to the consumer. So that's, again, why this research is so important.
I don't know where our microphones are. There.
Hi, hope this on. I'm Jeff Stroll. I'm with the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, and thank you all for your comments. My question, our center really believes in more information for better informing decisions, especially using labor market information. So hearing about the survey, I hear a set of information that's partially descriptive, right? If your parents have high education, you probably won't be dissatisfied, but my son can't change his parents as you can change a wife, you can't change his parents. And so I'm really wondering how Strada, Gallup sees the full body of information as becoming actionable and helping to use your term, Mr. Taylor, as game-changing, right? And so where is it actionable and where is it descriptive, and how do you see it being used to actually change the game? Thank you.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to our panel who represent people who are in charge of action at the state level, at the institution level, and then we can, Bill Hanson wants to weigh in on this about Strada education, but how, I guess the question I posed to you at first, Teresa, how would a policymaker use this information, more to come, of course, but to start thinking about policies and at the state level or policies within institutions?
Well, thank you for all the great work that Georgetown does. We often use your work to try to make sure people understand the importance of labor market outcomes in particular. But, I think that it is really hard to change, a big, complicated enterprise like higher education. And you certainly cannot build the will to do it unless you have some common data points that people can operate from and say, one, we know we need more people to have more education than they needed in the past. We know we need to, decrease debt, and these are debt levels. We know that people are more likely to be satisfied with their experience if they have a meaningful job. We know that the qualitative metrics are that they'll be, healthier, more civically engaged, all of those other reasons as well. And all of that data can drive the sustained support for higher education in state funding and state policies, back to the ROI. I mean, there are so many competing causes that need to be supported of value that for higher education to take its rightful place, which is, I think, the game changer in people's lives, in state economies, for employers meeting the needs, you have to do that through a common data that people believe. And people believe Gallup. people believe that it's done in a valid way. They don't believe all the other things they read sometimes. And so I think you have a credible source of data, driving the right questions, providing ongoing disaggregated information that we can use at the state level. I think all of that will help policymakers clear their way through all the confusion that exists out there to come up with state agendas for increasing attainment levels. And that's what we're all working on, to do that and then aligning it with what the state economy needs. So I think it really is as simple and at the same time as complex as having great data that people believe in that drive policy changes.
I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on.
I would just say Indiana University, Indiana, as many of you know, has two great state universities. One is Indiana University, where I'm based, and is mostly a liberal arts oriented, public service oriented, and then there's some other state university that does best known for its engineering, although it occasionally turns out a commissioner of higher education. But we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I suggested that, I certainly believe, my colleagues believe, liberal arts education remains of great importance in our society. But how do you marry that to that other point of what students are looking for? And there's some innovative efforts going on our campus to try to do that. Just let me say one. Our music school is one of the finest in the world, and they get some very talented performers, but not all of them are going to wind up center stage at the Metropolitan Opera. Let's put it that way, as good as they are. So the music school has a program trying to teach music majors how to be entrepreneurial. In other words, how to use their love and knowledge of music in a way that would create things. And those might be new kinds of venues for performers. It might be programs in schools. There are a host of things. But to focus not just on developing artistic skills, knowledge of music and music theory, but also how can you use your interest in that field to build something that might be, as I said it, a satisfying and fulfilling career. We need more experimentation in the liberal arts disciplines in that.
There's a question over here.
Thanks. Edie Fraser, STEM Connector. Congratulations to Strada and Gallup. First of all, this is very important work, as you all expose. We also applaud that the selection for STEM careers is much more advantageous. And so it's very interesting as you break the data, and you also don't say it's all STEM, but as you look at technology driving 80% of all the skills to jobs, you're also the experiential learning and the careers and all the examples of earn and learn that you've got, you've all emphasized it. Can you just say, where do we go with this in terms of really connecting early on the careers, the experiential learning, and the jobs? What should we really be doing that's different from each of you?
Well, I'll make just a comment and then pass it off, but I think that early, consistent, and ongoing exposure to careers and hands-on involvement with employers being very much engaged will be important. I also want to mention something that we haven't talked as much about today, but I serve on the CALE board, the Council on Adult and Experiential Education as well, and I think experiential education is really important for adults, and we need one of the game changers that we can talk about maybe going forward that I'd like to see Strada and Gallup look at, which is this whole discussion about how we give credit for things that people know and they've learned already. Certainly STEM and technology is an area that you could see this, where people have gained experience and they have knowledge, and how we actually quantify that in an academically rigorous way, I think is going to be important. So maybe a deeper dive on what level of knowledge and how you gain that outside of traditional higher ed providers would be really important going forward. And was that valued by your employer, and how do we give credit for that? So it's a little different than your question, but I had to put in a plug for that.
Well, I think it raises the question we've all been talking about is this is the start of a conversation, and I think we are going to have to dig deeper on the questions. What about that experience caused you to think it was the right decision? And those are the kinds of questions we're going to be asking over time, either through the recontactability we have on email. We could add another question to our survey with some flexibility. So this feedback we're going to be getting, this is the start today, literally, right now, is the start. And the feedback we're going to be getting over the next few years are going to help us answer a lot of these questions.
And one other thing I think would be interesting is the follow-up question. So if you would have obtained a different degree, what would that degree be? Because I think that will really help us go. That's sort of the next step is, so then if you would have gone to another school, what school would you have attended and why? So I really appreciate that this is baseline and you got to start somewhere, but there's a ton here to unbundle, because you may learn that the student would have gone from an English major not to a STEM major, but to a music major. We just don't know. So there's a whole bunch of, we've got to chase the logic down and make sure that we really understand what the consumer is saying.
Other questions? Yes.
Norma Goldstein from the Association of Community College Trustees. I direct an institute called the Governance Institute for Student Success, which focuses on data-informed governance. And I think the work that you're doing is going to be incredibly helpful to me personally as I do my work across the country, but also for students and parents. The one thing that, and Teresa mentioned it when she mentioned career services. All of career services are on the college campuses. I'm hoping that all of this work and that the conversation extends to employers. I have 3 well-educated sons, and the hardest thing is finding the right employer. It's not about the student, it's also having that conversation with the employers. And I'm hoping that Gallup and Strada bring that conversation to employers, because I think that's really where the rubber hits the road with all of this, and I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I don't know if there are comments here. Thank you. Other questions? Anybody on Facebook? Maybe back there. I don't know if our Facebook folks are responding at all, but let me know.
All
Okay.
right. Stephen Taylor with the American Council on Education. Just one question, and it may not have an answer to it yet, but it may be something to think about. Is there a healthy level of regret? And by that I mean the world changes, the economy changes, so a degree that you got 10 or 20 years ago may no longer be relevant, and so that may lead to regret. So if we have no regret, then that means that we have an economy that's stagnant, and that's also not good. So just something that as you continue to go down this path, think about what that healthy level might be.
That's a really good question. We've talked about that.
Yeah, we
Brandon.
did.
Well, what I'll say is, I mean, that's a good question, right? But look at the benchmarks that we have would be my first guidepost. And those with postgraduate degrees are at about 24%, which is about half the national level, right? So we at least know that there's a category of folks whose regret level is at a quarter as opposed to half. So I don't know what the right level is, right? Probably 0 is not exactly the goal, but I think if you look at the categories that have the lowest levels of regret, those are at least benchmarks to say, how can we get more bachelor degree holders down to that level, right? I mean, so there's a lot there. And I really, truly believe there are a lot of actionable insights in this data, certainly things that beg for further exploration, but the themes that we see, right? Back to one of the points I mentioned in my presentation about technical, vocational degree holders, right? Those who are STEM majors at the bachelor degree level, postgraduate. You know, when you start to all ask the questions, what do those things have in common? There are themes that start to rise up, and this panel has touched on them, about career alignment, about real work experiences. And so from other research we've done, one of the things that we're very low on in terms of measures that matter a lot in higher education is the number of students, and this is actually graduates, right, who say they have had a job or an internship where they applied what they were learning in the classroom. That stands right now at less than 1/3 of all college graduates. So if you just want to start to think about better career services, right, one of the visions for career services may be that it's so deeply embedded in the pedagogy of higher education that it doesn't exist as a separate function. In other words, having an internship or a hands-on long-term project, that to me is a pedagogical example that can be embedded in every single program and major, including the liberal arts. And one quick tidbit on that is, when we look at outcomes for liberal arts versus STEM majors, on some of the things we look at, like workplace engagement and other elements from the Gallup Purdue Index, which Strada has been involved in, it's true that liberal arts majors are slightly lower. Here's the key insight. If they say they had a job or an internship or they applied what they were learning, they're on par with the STEM majors. So this is not just about what we majored in, it's about what I would call pedagogy, and pedagogy can be aligned with purpose and ways that I think are going to be much more productive.
The other piece of this, I just mentioned, I want to emphasize it, is that 70% of this sample has indicated that it opened being receiving additional calls, follow-up calls. This is going to be important because what we're looking is at a moment in time. So of this sample, there are people who graduated, say, in the last 5 years, where the prospects for recent college graduates have not been as good as they would have been for somebody who, say, graduated in the 1990s. Let's take a couple of examples. Well, we're going to see how this changes and how that affects, over time, perceptions of the quality of higher education.
And I'd also, as we wrap up, one of the things that I can't overstate is that America is literally browning and graying at once. Okay? So while we look at this data, this is not about a race discussion or anything. It's just the reality, right? And since we're talking about the workplace, we're needing to fuel, to provide this, in this knowledge-based economy, we need really smart people. And frankly, we need a lot of smart people who look like me. That's just the reality, right? So we've got to figure out, this research is not just, hypothetical or theoretical, I should say. This is about figuring out all of the trillions of dollars, and I see Secretary Cantor over there, in that we K through 12, PK through 12, and then we dump a ton of money into higher education. At the end of the day, the taxpayer is owed a return on that investment. And the reality is, fast forward, they're going to be a ton, it's a browning population. So I think I can't overstate enough that as we look at this, we need to really begin to understand how do different communities see this. Not because you want to separate black people from white people or brown people, but because they are going to be, we're a majority minority population very quickly. What all of the stats say, 2045 or 2050, this is coming. So I think I can't emphasize, I would love to see us do more work in that area.
And I'd like to make a final comment, too. I also think we need to consider, I think Johnny's points make a lot of sense, and we have to realize that how much our demographics are changing and what the reality of that is. I also think we need to be focused on the changing nature of work because of automation, artificial intelligence, and what that means for jobs. And so real-time data that actually can respond to that. I mean, 40% of millennials, even though they believe that automation is good for the economy, believe that their jobs could be replaced. I mean, some, the studies would show that 50% of jobs could be replaced right now with the technology we have in terms of the kinds of jobs they are. So, a lot of satisfaction that people will have will be attached to their ability to skill up, change the nature of their preparation for the jobs that are there. So I would offer that one of the real contributions that we can make with this data going forward is that it is real time, and it is also thinking about the changing nature of the world of work and how people are prepared for that.
I want to give, and we have maybe time for one virtual question. Don't ignore our Facebook audience.
One virtual question. So how do programs like boot camps fit into this data? When will higher education start to really embrace these programs for learners?
Well, I think it's another example of being exposed to what you're going to do while you're learning, and I think people are highly motivated when they go to boot camps, and I think that they are clearly getting kind of meaningful employment after. I think once again, many times whatever you learn, especially in the area of technology, it's not a one and done. I mean, it is a continuation, but I think there is no doubt that people who make decisions to go to something like a boot camp are likely to get a good job after that, and that's important to people. So, okay, go. One last question.
Tom Luna with, I'm the Senior Vice President with Project Lead the Way and a member of the advisory committee. But I had a question as I listened to this conversation that I could have waited till our next meeting, but I think it might be good for the discussion.
I'm bracing myself.
No, it's a good question. In my former life, I served as the state superintendent of Idaho for 8 years, and when you were talking about the people that we visited with and learned about and what they felt of what happened in college and beyond, how many of them decided in high school what they wanted to pursue when they got to college, and what influence did their experiences in middle school and high school have with what they chose to pursue in college? And is there information here that we can gather that can help inform K-12 as well as post-secondary?
I don't know, Brandon, if you wanted to talk.
Well, just a plug for the forthcoming report that Carol mentioned, which is going to go into how people made their decisions, right? So it will be incredibly instructive because it turns out that certain sources of information, including various types of people, et cetera, increase or decrease the probability that you are either, satisfied with your decisions or regret it. So there will be some incredibly specific and instructive things coming from that. To get to the question you're asking about, that really is a perfect example of what we would call a recontact study, right? To go back to within the data we've already collected, right? To give you an example, we have a pool of 12,000 people who have agreed to be recontacted who have some college, no degree. Right? We can go back to those folks, do an in-depth study, do that very rapidly, right? That's going to be from a sampled group, from a random digit dial process, right? So to your point, right, I do think there is interest in going deeper into, how many people started college with a clear idea what they wanted to do. I mean, and so those are going to be fascinating things that we look at. There is previous research on that in the higher education literature. Your goals at 18 very much align with your life satisfaction 25 years later, right? I mean, so we know that expectations, clarity of goals, and purpose at the beginning are certainly important factors. So we don't have those answers right now, but those are also things that are a perfect example of the power of a recontact pool from this data set. So
I want to give any opportunity for our panel members, just one last word before we close up.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore something that has not been said, except for one brief reference to pedagogy. And that is that this conversation also needs to be extended to include faculty and academic administrators. They're the frontline people, so to speak, here. As we think about promotion and tenure standards, hiring standards, and so on, contributions faculty make to the kinds of issues we've been discussing rarely, I don't want to say never, but rarely get sufficient emphasis. I spent a lot of time counseling students about careers, didn't much matter. That was not what I was going to be evaluated on. In fact, the vice provost for academic affairs at my university once said, well, we're interested in research and teaching, but service, meaning this kind of advising, doesn't count at all. So that's got to change too, and I think are there any faculty in the room, for example? One or two. We've got to get this out so that those frontline service deliverers are involved.
I would just conclude by, extending my thanks again on behalf of the states for the great work that's been done. I see this as the beginning. I thought there were many points raised today which will be instructive for the next phase of this, either the disaggregation of the current data or the next deep dive, and I look forward to sharing in that and being a part of that process. Thank you.
Ditto.
Okay. Well, thank you, panelists, very much for getting us off through this thing. As As we close, we did say we wanted this to be a start of a conversation. Continue the conversation. You can see on the screen how to continue following up on the reports and how to generate your ideas to us. Also, you're not strangers. We know most of you. You can pick up the phone, call us, and email us with your thoughts. Thanks again to the Strada Education and Gallup team, and we look forward to continuing the discussion with you. And if you see opportunities for us to engage with your organizations, let us know. We're happy to do this sort of thing as we can with your constituents as well. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.